Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming today, and thank you for the State Library of North Carolina for hosting this Let's Talk 2020 Census Counting Coastal North Carolina. I appreciate the State Library of North Carolina for hosting these various workshops to discuss counting for the 2020 census in different parts of the state and for different populations. I know everybody's here has been involved in making sure their community is counted. This is an important goal of making sure everybody's counted once, only once, and in the right place. This is an event that occurs every 10 years, and there's a lot of work that goes into it in between decades. I've been planning, and many of y'all have been involved in those planning stages over the last several years, and here it is. The challenge right now is that about 41% of North Carolina households have not done the 2020 census, and that's more than 4 million North Carolinians that are still have not responded. And as many I've heard in the last couple of weeks, the census count has been cut short, or at least gone back to its original plan of ending at the end of September 30th. So there's a lot of challenges between now and then in ensuring that everybody's counted. To help us understand the process for counting our coastal communities, we're lucky to have James Cofield of Duck, North Carolina, with us here today. He was appointed by Governor Cooper to sit on the North Carolina Complete Count Commission. But I will say that James is probably not that everybody on the Complete Count Commission has been very involved in making sure everyone is counted in North Carolina, but I will say that James has been particularly involved in Eastern North Carolina in the coastal communities. And so I think it's great that he's available here today to talk to us about reaching the populations in North Carolina, because there are specific challenges that are in those coastal areas. Today's Q&A, today's question and answers is being recorded, and this session with supporting resources will be posted on the State Library's YouTube channel. This Q&A session is just that. If you have a question, please use the chat feature. This is located near the bottom center of your screen. Click on chat, and you'll be able to type your question in the window that pops up. James will begin with an initial summary of the count of the census in Eastern North Carolina with initial questions to get the conversation started. Please feel free to enter your questions in the chat at any time. Now I'd like to introduce North Carolina Complete Count Commissioner James Cofield. James is also the president and CEO of Cofield Properties, secretary of the Dare County Board of Elections, and vice chairman of the Town of Duck Planning Board. North Carolina ranks second in the nation with respect to the most small towns. Of the 15 North Carolina counties with the highest rate of census undercount, most are rural. Further, of the 15 hard to count counties, 5 are in Eastern North Carolina, and the coastal communities present yet a different challenge with the number of vacant and rental properties, and also some of our major military communities. Yet, despite the unique elements of counting our coastal communities, James believes we're in a great position to meet that challenge. So please welcome James to share his insight and knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Mike. I'll just make a couple of very brief remarks before I wade into Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities. As we all know, an accurate and complete census count is incredibly important to all of us. The census determines how billions of dollars in federal funding are distributed, including $43 billion in North Carolina. The political seats are apportioned based on census count in Congress, and it is incredibly important in helping communities to plan for the future. With respect to, and Mike mentioned it, with respect to the operational delays of the census count, we are now presented with some challenges. I think with these challenges, though, we also are in a position to take advantage of the extra time and do some things that we might well not have had time to complete earlier. The interruptions of programmatic follow-ups has resulted in people, because of the coronavirus, of some apprehensions on the part of residents throughout the state, and certainly in Eastern North Carolina. True for all communities, though, the 2020 Census Management has taken steps to ensure that enumerators will be wearing protective equipment to reduce the spread of COVID-19. The delays present the opportunity for all residents to self-respond to the 2020 census. So people who have not responded earlier now have more time to self-respond. And there are some other, what I think are advantages and distinct opportunities based on these delays. For the most part, Eastern North Carolina can be seen through the lens of two communities, rural and coastal. The characteristics of these two communities are distinct, and the challenges and opportunities I will talk about very briefly. Mike has indicated some of the numbers that are important in looking at Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities. Let me just emphasize a couple that I think are important. Of the 100 counties in North Carolina, 80 of them are rural counties. 14 regional cities or metropolitan areas, and 6 urban counties. As Mike indicated, North Carolina ranks second in the nation with the most rural counties, counties with a population of less than 10,000. Eastern North Carolina, with few exceptions, most rural leaders, those in official capacities, either in county government or the towns within Eastern North Carolina, understand that the 2020 census is extremely important in building support for rural life, and are hard at work in that endeavor. As a part of my work earlier in the year, I visited the county seats and spoke to county commissioners in 11 counties in Eastern North Carolina. And the one point that I drove home religiously is that it is in everyone's interest that all of the residents of their counties are counted. And I think without exception, all of the leaders that I spoke to understood that, and are making efforts to ensure that all residents are counted. Again, I'll say the extra time presents to us the opportunity to do more work. Complete count committees throughout Eastern North Carolina, or North Carolina as a whole for that matter, have more time to do work that was left undone earlier. As an example, I live in Dare County, and the Dare County Complete Count Committee has been hard at work with a number of programs to reach the residents in Dare County. That work continues. And there are complete count committees set up in a number of other communities in Eastern North Carolina. I would certainly urge, as I'm sure we all do, urge those communities that have not established a complete count committee to do so immediately and begin the work of ensuring that everyone in their county is counted. A number of programs have been effective in reaching hard to count communities. And I won't go into all of those, but the counties have some distinct opportunities to reach out to everyone in the county, including those in the hard to count communities. It'll vary a little from county to county, but counties have under their control enormous resources, and they have communication links that can reach numerous people throughout the counties. And it is not too late for counties to begin that process of outreach through their communication mediums, and talking to the trusted people in those communities, particularly in reaching hard to count communities. Eastern North Carolina is characterized, with the exception of a couple of metropolitan areas in Pitt County, for an example, with Greenville, and it is characterized as having a substantially, or a population that is substantially rural. And so rural counties have a couple of characteristics with geographic distancing between homes and counties, homes and farms. A significant population of migrant farm workers, and in some of those communities, the lack of broadband communication links. So those are some of the challenges that tend to present some difficulty in rural North Carolina. The flow of funds into rural North Carolina is as important as it is in the urban areas, if not more so, in building the infrastructure in those communities and the social programs that the billions of dollars flow into those communities across the country, billions. What are some of the ways that a county can reach and communicate to their residents? By inserting a census message in water and sewage billings, tax billings, an outreach, a specific outreach in rural healthcare provider services, food-based services, rural citizens events, although understandably those events have been cut back somewhat because of the COVID-19 limitations, and partnerships with faith-based communities. Let me say a little now about coastal communities. The coastal communities, the way that I set up the demographics and the statistics, those communities that border 10 counties that border on the Atlantic Ocean, not counting the tributaries from the Atlantic Ocean. Those counties have a population of 773,000 people, or an average of 77,000 people per county. Combined, these coastal communities represent approximately 7% of North Carolina's total population. Chief among the differences in looking at coastal communities is that many of these communities have a housing base that is geared to, that's a vacant home housing base, rental properties of vacationers who are not residents of those communities. Let me say, as an example, my county, which is Dare County, has a housing base that is 50% of the housing stock is classified as vacant or rental properties. So over half of the houses are not occupied by permanent residents. That begins to point out that the employment base in these communities is significantly different from the rest of the state. The employment base for Eastern North Carolina generally tends to be that employment base around in rural communities around farm and farmland. In the coastal communities, it is largely based on seasonal employment. And in seasonal employment that serve the segments that cater to the visitors are the ones that would obviously come to mind quickly: restaurants, hospitality, recreation, and the like. The long-term employment, year-round employment, would be industries such as fishing, boat building, real estate enterprises, home building, landscaping, and other service-oriented industries. Since the employment base is a little different in coastal communities, my suggestion is that the way to reach the people that we want to count, particularly in hard to count communities, would be through a trusted voice. And that trusted voice would certainly include employers. And to the degree that industry associations, chambers of commerce can speak to the employers in any given locale, it is certainly my suggestion that we use that as an avenue of reaching and talking to the residents of those communities. And I think that is particularly important in counting those hard to count communities. Just a little bit more on the statistics. 74% of the population of North Carolina is from rural counties, rural communities. In Eastern North Carolina, in Western North Carolina, that tends to be, the numbers are a little different, 63%. Over half of North Carolina rural's population is in Eastern North Carolina. Only New Hanover County, counties such as Pitt and Cumberland are regional by statistically. Brunswick County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country, with a growth rate of 28% from 2010 to 2018. Pender County, 19% growth rate. Currituck County, 15%. New Hanover County, 15%. Onslow, 12%. Much of the growth in these counties is net migration, meaning people moving into the county from other areas after you subtract both births and deaths. So mostly the growth that Eastern North Carolina and its coastal community, or at least the coastal communities, see is from net migration. North Carolina has another, Eastern North Carolina has another distinction of having a number of counties with a loss in population. And those counties in Eastern North Carolina would include Hyatt, Washington, Bertie, Edgecombe, Northampton, Halifax, Terrell, Columbus, Pasquotank, Robeson. Eastern North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina, the rural counties tend to be the most diverse counties in the state also. Some counties have benefited from the growth of the military communities, from Camp Lejeune to Cherry Point to Summer Point, Sunny Point, and Fort Bragg. So to some, while the coronavirus has presented some challenges in the 2020 census count, challenges because of the delay from an operational standpoint of the Census Bureau in counting folks in those counties or throughout North Carolina, but certainly in the counties in Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities. I think Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities benefit from the extra time. The extra time gives us the opportunity to see where we fall versus the count we would like to see by this time. Therein is an opportunity to reach out, to do considerably more outreach in a short period of time. I think one of these distinct opportunities is to intensify this outreach through employers, to use employers as the trusted voice to help in spreading the word and giving a very clear message, particularly in hard to count communities. And a way to reach those employers might well be through industry associations and trade associations that give the message about the 2020 census, its importance in every community. And secondly, I think counties are in a distinct position to use their communication links to reach out to the residents of each county and give a message, again, tax bills, water and sewer billings, your website for the county websites, and through the various links that the county governments use to communicate with their residents. I think that's a fair summary of what I think are opportunities in Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities. While it is a challenge, I think we can meet this challenge with the opportunities that are still in front of us. And the enumerators will be knocking on doors through the end of September now. That time has been shortened from the end of October to it's now the end of September. But all of us have some work in front of us. And I think we can meet the challenge, just dig in our heels and begin the work that we now have to do, recognizing the challenge in front of us. Mike mentioned that that North Carolina is down as a whole roughly 4 million people from where we would like to be. that's an impediment to all of us. And so I think all of us should double our efforts to make sure that we count everyone that we possibly can. Count everyone, count them once, and count them where they live. And I think certainly many of the counties in Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities are working hard to meet that objective. Let's not forget that complete count committees in communities throughout Eastern North Carolina can be very helpful in helping us to achieve these goals.
Thank you. Thank you, James. One of the things I want to kind of give an update on is just some of the operational timelines that have, just to let folks know what is left, so we're still in a period through the end of September 30th. People can respond online or by phone, self-response. And then by self-responding, the likelihood of someone knocking on your door decreases. And then, as James pointed out, actually this week, we just started, or the Census Bureau just started, non-response follow-up to those households that have not responded to the census. And they will continue that at least until the end of September. There are a few other processes that are going on that the Census Bureau still has to complete. One of the things is the group quarters enumeration that has been going on and will continue through September, and that's working with facilities like nursing homes, like military barracks, prisons, college dormitories, to make sure they're working with them to make sure those folks are counted. And for colleges, they're assuming that they're counting people where they would have been on April 1st, even if for COVID they went back home, but they're still going to try to count them where they would have been on April 1st, so that does not impact college towns. There's also service-based enumeration, transitory locations, and count of folks experiencing homelessness. And so those are all different operations that will be conducted in September. Transitory locations would be things like people living in RVs and in RV parks that may be just kind of nomads, but they'll be counted where they were on April 1st, 2020. Let's see what other questions we may have.
Mike, can I just step in only for a second? Mike
Sure.
mentioned the 3 ways of completing the census. Those who have received the questionnaire in the mail should respond by returning that, by mailing that back, mailing the completed questionnaire back. By over the internet, and the website for completing the 2020 census is my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov, or thirdly on the phone, and the phone number is 844-330-2020. So I just thought that we might as well define what the options were.
No, I appreciate that. And if anybody has any questions, we'll entertain questions. I'll kind of follow up with James and just kind of reiterate. There are internet self-response can be done not only in English, but in Spanish and in 12 non-English languages like Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. And there's also 59 non-English languages that you can call to get assistance over the phone.
And it takes less than 10 minutes to complete the census. So anyone who has not completed the census, you really help to impact positively your community, and the time you invest in doing so is less than 10 minutes. It is safe. It is confidential. No census worker can divulge any information for 72 years. And there's criminal penalties for doing so. The census is an aggregate of information, statistical information that is shared, not individual information about any individual. So for less than a 10-minute investment of time, all of us can help to impact our communities in a very positive way.
So I have a question which actually impacts at least Onslow County, I think Craven County as well. The question is related to the military. And the question is, if I'm in the military and I am counted say in Jacksonville, will that impact my home of record for tax purposes? So there's a lot of military folks that don't want to move their home of record. They may have a home of record in Texas. They may do that for personal reasons, or maybe because they want to, have tax base. But we want you counted here because this is where you live. If you're stationed in Jacksonville in Camp Lejeune, then you should be counted here, you and your family. That does not impact any sort of home of record for those purposes. So Census Bureau doesn't share the information with other entities. So, but it is important that you're counted here because you're stationed here and you live here on a permanent basis. Let's see. James, what has been maybe some ideas, or do you think has been most helpful in getting the count in the communities, in your communities?
I think in the communities that I have visited and the communities that I talk to on a regular basis, those communities have established complete count committees. And those committees have been at work in building the census count in their respective communities. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here in Dare County, I can speak the most about. Certainly, let me begin by saying certainly the coronavirus limitations have caused some interruptions. That notwithstanding, there's outreach that has been planned, working with and through the libraries, working with faith-based communities, and just an outreach, a consistent outreach to talk with the folk in the particular communities. In addition to the county efforts, the county tends to stimulate interest in towns in Dare County, various towns, including my town of Duck, but various towns have delivered through their website messages about the importance of residents completing the 2020 census. There are some graphics that do a pretty good job in doing so. and those have been used. Again, counties that are low, their response, where the self-response rates are low, should look at the possibility of including a census message in their tax billings and their water and sewer billings, and in having a consistent message on their websites about the 2020 census. And those are means of outreach where you don't involve the people participation. I mean, people to get it going, but they're not knocking on the doors and you're not calling people on the phone. So there are absolutely some ways that counties can push the 2020 census message, get the towns engaged and involved, and I encourage them in doing so. In addition to talking to county officials in Eastern North Carolina, I have spent some time in talking with constituent organizations, both in Eastern North Carolina and in the balance of the state. And chambers of commerce are an example, and that's a way to reach employers and stress the importance and get them engaged. Trade associations, as an example, I've talked to the Dare County Home Builders Association, and a number of the employees in the home building trade are people from hard to count communities. Well, if we get our employers engaged, understand the importance, and have them as the trusted voice who's reaching to their employees, it, in the worst case, cannot hurt. In the best case, I think it can, it's just another way of reaching folk who might otherwise not get the message about the importance of the 2020 census.
James, you've kind of talked about the different challenges that, I mean, Eastern North Carolina and particularly the coastal communities are very unique from the rest of the state. Not in, you know, in terms of being more rural, in terms of having some military communities, in terms of having some fast growing, and a few counties that are actually seeing some losses. So there are a lot of different challenges. And you've been knocking on doors and talking to people in Eastern North Carolina, but what, since you started this, what are some, maybe a unique challenge that you came across that you didn't realize was there, and maybe how you've overcome it or helped people overcome that to make sure we have a good count in those communities?
I think my general answer is to offer encouragement to the various counties in Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities. And let me be a little more specific now. The Census Bureau puts out statistics about how well the census operation is going. And one of those statistics is called the self-response rate. Well, if you look at the self-response rate for Dare County as an example, you'd be pretty disappointed in how well the residents in Dare County are self-responding. Self-responding meaning that the individual is responding based on returning the mailing that they received, or going on the website, or calling the number and responding to the 2020 census, as opposed to an enumerator knocking on the door, getting their response. So again, if you look at Dare County as an example, you would be discouraged by the statistics of the self-response rate for Dare County. What that, without recalculating that rate, taking into account the number of vacant houses, vacant meaning rental, just vacant, or rental, seasonal rentals, you recalculate that, you will see that the self-response rate in Dare County is actually quite high. Not as high as we'd like to see it, but it's above the state average, and one of the higher self-response rates in the region. So my answer, Mike, is that I think all of us should continue to the degree possible to offer encouragement to the counties in Eastern North Carolina to establish and get their complete count committees engaged and working. So that's how the numbers are a little different in Eastern North Carolina and its coastal communities than they might be elsewhere.
Right. And that kind of feeds into a question I received. It says, my neighbor lives in their beach house for the summer. Should they be counted at the beach, in the beach house? And the answer is people should be counted where they live most of the time. So if someone's living in a beach house for 3 months and 9 months they're living in Raleigh, they should be counted in Raleigh. Now, if there's a question, sometimes people may live 6 months in one area of the country and 6 months in the other area or location. And so if it's an equal amount of time, 6 months in one place and 6 months in the other, then they should be counted where they were living on April 1st, which is the census day. So that has a lot of impact for communities. And as James pointed out, when you have a lot of seasonal housing, those will be counted in the census, but they'll be counted as vacant housing for rental purposes. And it really is, I mean, the census, to be able to conduct the census, it is the census of the population, but technically in the way it's conducted, it's really a census of housing. So the Census Bureau has worked closely with communities throughout the state and through other partners like the U.S. Postal Service to make sure we have a good list to work from. And that's where they have started out to make sure everybody's included, every housing unit is included in the original census count. So that's kind of where it goes from.
Mike, I think for the purposes of our audience, the point you just made about access to counting people is through housing. And that's why the access to reaching college students is through the colleges and universities. The access to reaching folk who are living in nursing homes is through the nursing homes. There are also a number of communities where a lot of people have post office boxes as opposed to their mail coming delivered to their street address. That's the case for my own house here. And so if it was the only way of reaching me was by mailing, then I wouldn't get it because I don't receive mail at the house address here. So I think I will emphasize the point that you made, that the access to counting people is through where they live, through their residence, either in group housing or it's just where they live, period.
And that kind of gets into the response rates being kind of lagging in addition to the vacant properties. A lot of the areas in the coastal areas were what we call update leaves. So where you would normally maybe get a delivery of your mail to a post office box, they'll actually drop off a census form at your housing unit address or housing unit. And you can still respond online, or you can just fill out the form and mail it back. James, is the census safe?
It is safe. I'll speak to safety from a couple of standpoints. If you've not filled out the census yet, beginning yesterday, census enumerators are back on the job, meaning there is a substantial chance that you will get a knock on the door. Those census enumerators will be wearing protective equipment, so you'll be safe from at least the possibility of catching the virus. It's safe from the standpoint of your information being confidential. The census enumerators are sworn not to in any way divulge individual information. This is statistical information that's aggregated to talk about my community, Duck as a community, or Dare County as a community, but not to give information about any individual information they have taken. They are sworn, the census enumerators are sworn to keep the information confidential, and it is confidential for 72 years. And thirdly, it's the same once the information is in the system itself. That census information is confidential with respect to individuals. The census information is aggregated so that statistically we're able to look at communities as a whole or states as a whole, but it is safe. And you mentioned earlier, Mike, the information is not even shared with other departments or agencies in the federal government. So it is safe.
Great.
There's no reason from a safety standpoint not to respond to the census.
And it is just a simple form asking 10 questions about, and just basic questions. How many people live in a household, whether the household is rented or owned, or housing unit is rented or owned, and the age, sex, race, ethnicity, and relationship status between people in the household. So whether people are non-married partners or partners and children in the household. And the people, you want to make sure everybody's counted in that housing unit. That could be a grandparent with a grandchild living with the grandparent. It could be multi-generational households with two different families living in that household, or it could be people that are unrelated. So it's just make sure everybody's counted in that housing unit. I want to thank James. Do you have any closing thoughts before I close out?
Yeah, my closing thought, Mike, would be that it is in everyone's interest to complete the 2020 census. Regardless of your method of completing this 2020 census, please do so. It helps your community, it helps your neighbors, it helps the state of North Carolina. More funds, federal funds flow into North Carolina based upon your responding to the 2020 census. And if they don't come into North Carolina, they're going to some other community outside of North Carolina. So it's in all of our interest to complete the 2020 census. And each of us can ask our friends and make a comment. Have you completed the 2020 census yet? We should all encourage our friends, neighbors, relatives to complete the 2020 census. It might be that that some of us out here can help the effort with respect to the complete count committees. If you're uncertain about that, call your county government. Call the number for your county government, your county at your county seat, and ask them how you can help with this process.
Great. Thanks, James. And I'll thank everyone for coming here today, and anybody that's watching this after this event. Hopefully it's been helpful and informative. I thank all of you for staying involved in your communities and understanding how important the census is for your communities. And I just want to reiterate something, that people think that the 2020 census, that it just impacts this year. In reality, it's going to impact the next 10 years, because every 10 years is the only chance we get at counting the entire population. And after that, every survey that's out there, like the unemployment survey, survey about poverty, American Community Survey, and then population estimates that are produced every year, both from my office, the state demographer's office, where we estimate populations of cities and counties annually, and also the Census Bureau does population estimates every year. All of those information informs funding for state and local government. It informs private industry planning and determines where restaurants may locate. All that information can have impacts not only for 2020, but for the next 10 years and beyond. So it is highly important and critical that everybody respond until we get a complete count for 2020. Thank you very much, and look forward to our next session on, I believe, the rural communities will occur next week. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you for joining us. Next week, we'll talk about the 2020 census in rural North Carolina. And there's a link in your chat box if you want to find out more about that. And thank you for your participation, and thank you, James, for providing information about coastal communities. Everybody get counted.